It all started with what seemed like an ordinary warning from the old man next door. He was a reclusive figure, always dressed in faded flannel and worn-out boots, with a gray beard covering most of his face like a second layer of skin. No one in the neighborhood really talked to him, but one night as I was locking my door, he approached me with an odd, urgent expression. "You live alone now, don't you?" His voice was hoarse, like he hadn't spoken to anyone in a long time. "Yes," I replied, a little uncomfortable but still polite. "Why?" He leaned in close, his breath warm with the smell of whiskey. "You'd better count your windows twice every night before bed," he said, his eyes narrowing. "Make sure they're all closed, locked. If not, well, let's just say it won't end well." I chuckled awkwardly, unsure if he was joking or just drunk. "Sure, I'll do that." The old man's expression didn't change. "I'm serious. Kid, count them. Twice, or they'll get in." I watched him walk back to his house, an uneasy feeling beginning to settle in my stomach. "They'll get in?" What did he mean? But I dismissed it as the ramblings of a lonely old man with too much time and liquor on his hands. That night, as I walked around the house before bed, I found myself thinking about his strange warning. I stood in front of the first window in my bedroom and locked it tightly, then the one in the kitchen. After hesitating for a moment, I moved through the house, carefully checking each window, exactly as he had suggested. One in the bathroom, two in the living room, all closed and locked. When I reached the last one in the hallway, I counted again in my head. 5 windows, all closed. It felt silly, but I did it anyway, twice, exactly as he said. Nothing happened that night, of course, but over the next few days, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I noticed small things, a draft even though the windows were closed, strange noises in the night, and most unsettling of all, the persistent feeling that I was being watched. The following week, I came home late from work, exhausted, and forgot about the old man's warning. I went straight to bed, my body too tired to bother checking the windows. I didn't even think about it until the middle of the night when I was woken by a soft tapping sound. At first, I thought it was rain, but the night was dry. The tapping grew louder, more urgent. My heart started pounding as I sat up in bed, listening. The sound was coming from the hallway window, the last one I always checked. I hesitated, fear gripping me, but curiosity pushed me to get out of bed. As I approached the hallway, the tapping suddenly stopped, leaving an eerie silence. My heartbeat thundered in my ears. The window was closed, of course, but as I reached for the lock, I saw it. A handprint on the glass. Not mine. Something else's. Something that shouldn't be there. I stumbled back in panic, my breath catching in my throat. The handprint was too large. Too distorted. It pressed against the glass from the outside, as if something had been watching me. In a frenzy, I ran through the house, checking every window, counting twice, exactly as the old man had warned. But all the windows were closed, all locked. Yet the feeling that something was wrong only grew stronger, more intense than ever. The next night, I made sure to check the windows before bed, counting them carefully. 5 windows, twice. Then I went to sleep. But the knocking came again, this time louder, faster. Not just one window, from all the windows. Panicked and rhythmic knocking from every room surrounding me. I jumped out of bed, my body trembling with fear. The windows all closed, but the knocking didn't stop. I backed into the middle of the living room, cold sweat running down my back. And that's when I saw it, the shadow moving outside the glass. The figure, tall and thin, with unnaturally long limbs and a face that seemed to shift shapes under the pale moonlight. It pressed against the glass, its horrific face slowly turning toward me. The eyes, if they could be called eyes, stared at me, empty and hungry. The knocking stopped, but the window started to creak. I don't know how long I stood there, frozen in fear. But eventually, the figure melted back into the darkness, leaving me shaken and breathless. I didn't sleep all night. The next morning, I rushed to the old man's house, desperately seeking answers. But when I knocked, there was no response. Neighbors said he had passed away 3 days ago, right when the knocking began. Now I count my windows twice every night. I never forget again, because I know they're still out there, waiting. I really wanted to move, but it wasn't that simple. You know when you watch horror movies and point out how stupid the protagonists are? Well, sometimes that stupidity has a reason. Move? I couldn't, because I was broke and had nowhere else to go. Investigate? Investigate what? I wasn't in the mood to play detective. All I could do was wonder about that old man. The thing is, maybe I'm just not the kind of person who can take care of themselves. I only had one option left, to carry on the same way. The knocking had stopped, but the fear hadn't. I spent my nights on high alert. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of the wind making the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. I counted my windows twice, 3 times, sometimes more, obsessively checking the locks and double-checking the latches. But the paranoia never went away. It felt like the house itself had turned hostile, its walls too thin to keep out whatever was lurking beyond the glass. The old man had relatives, but none of them knew anything about this and just claimed that his mind had started to falter. I tried contacting the previous tenant, but they had disappeared without a trace. I desperately messaged them asking for help, even sent a letter to the address where they were supposed to be living now. It happened during the day when I heard the knock. A sharp, deliberate knock on the front door. For a moment, I thought it was the same knocking as before, but this was different, more human. I approached cautiously, peering through the peephole. A woman stood on the porch, her face partially obscured by the hood of her jacket. She looked tired but determined. "Can I help you?" I asked through the door, reluctant to open it. "We need to talk," she said. "About your windows." My blood ran cold. "Who are you?" "My name is Claire. I used to live here before you." She paused, as if weighing whether to continue or not. "I know what's happening to you." I never expected her to contact me. Why would she? If I could leave, I selfishly wouldn't ever come back to help anyone who lived here after me. I hesitated, then opened the door just enough to crack it open. Claire's eyes were dark, sunken, and she looked like she hadn't slept in weeks. There was something haunting her, a desperation that mirrored my own growing fear. "Thank you for coming," she sighed, her breath visible in the cold October air. "The windows, the knocking, the things that come at night. You've seen them, haven't you?" I opened the door a little wider, my heart pounding in my chest. "You know?" Claire nodded grimly and stepped inside, glancing nervously around the house as if expecting something to attack her from the shadows. "I've tried everything," she said, her voice low. "Moving didn't help. They followed me. They always do." "They?" She looked at me, her eyes filled with a fear that couldn't be faked. "There's more than one. I don't know what they are or where they come from, but they're drawn to certain houses. This house, it's infected. The old man next door, he was the only one who knew how to keep them out. He's dead." Her eyes widened, red and twitching. "No." "Yes." She winced, then shook her head. "His advice, count the windows twice every night. That was a warning, not a superstition." "Have you followed it?" "But I did," I protested. "I counted them." "Twice. Just like he said. They still came." Claire's expression darkened. "Have you ever thought that maybe the problem isn't with the windows themselves?" I blinked, confused. "What do you mean?" "They don't just want to come in. They want to replace." She paused, letting the weight of her words sink in. "You have 5 windows, right? What if one night there were 6? I froze, the implication of the question cutting me like a knife. I had never thought to question the number of windows, only that they were shut and locked. But the memory of that night, the feeling that something was wrong, came rushing back. The handprint on the glass, the figure outside the window. What if it wasn't outside? What if it was already inside? A window I hadn't counted? Claire saw the realization dawn on my face. "They don't always come from outside," she said softly. "Sometimes they're already here. They mimic what's familiar, but there's always a flaw, a detail that's off. Maybe the number of windows, maybe something else. You have to stay alert." My mind raced, recalling every night I counted the windows, every creak and whisper in the house I dismissed as ordinary. Could I have already let something in without realizing it? "There has to be a way to stop them," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "There is," Claire said, but her tone was heavy with doubt. "I've been trying to figure it out for years. They can't stand certain things, mirrors, for instance. They can't see themselves. That's how I found the one that got into my place. I saw it in the mirror, standing right behind me. It wasn't my reflection, but something else, wearing my face." My stomach churned. The idea of something wearing me like a mask making my skin crawl. "Then what did you do?" "I broke the mirror," she said simply. "But it only stopped it for a while. They're patient. They wait." I felt cold sweat on my neck. "How do you know they're here?" Claire turned fully toward me, her eyes locking onto mine with a gaze that sent chills through my body. "Do you still hear the knocking lately?" I slowly shook my head. "Not since last night." "That's because they're already inside." Her voice was barely audible now, more of a warning than an explanation. "They don't knock once they're in. They stay quiet, waiting for you to let your guard down." I felt my breath catch in my throat as I glanced around the room, my mind racing. I could feel it, the weight of their presence pressing down, the way the air felt too thick, too silent. The house wasn't empty. It never was. Claire stepped toward the door, her expression grim. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "But once they're inside, there's no going back. You can't fight them. All you can do is keep counting, and hope you don't forget again." She left without another word, disappearing into the gray evening fog, and I stood there, alone in the silence. the fear coiling tighter in my chest like a serpent. That night, I counted the windows again. 5. I counted twice, then a third time to be sure. But when I got to the window at the end of the hallway, I saw it. The 6th window. And something was staring at me from the other side of the glass. That was a horror story full of mystery that remains unsolved to this day. If you enjoy content like this, don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss other horror stories. And of course, share your horror stories in the comments section and DM my Instagram. I can't wait to read them.